or just welcome if you're new here. I'm Carmen. I'm an employment relations practitioner and I'm also the director of Employment Relations. I've included a list of my credentials in the description box below to give you some peace of mind around the content that I share. Today's topic is family responsibility leave. So who can claim family responsibility leave? How much are they entitled to? How does it work? When can you claim it? And a lot of other important information around family responsibility leave, so stay tuned for that. My usual disclaimer, I share a lot of information in these videos, but I'm not able to include every exception to the rule, and therefore these videos are for educational purposes only, and please contact a professional if you need to. My second disclaimer is that I'm discussing family responsibility leave as it is stated in the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. That means if your job or your industry is regulated by a sectoral determination or a bargaining council collective agreement, you can still watch this video, but then supplement the information in this video with the information contained in your sectoral determination or in the collective agreement for your bargaining council. That all being said, let's get into today's topic, family responsibility leave. In South Africa, there are several different types of leave that employees are entitled to. So for example, annual leave, maternity leave, parental leave, adoption leave, commissioning parental leave, family responsibility leave, sick leave. Okay, those are all the ones that are detailed in the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. And then there will be other types of leave that could potentially be discretionary. So for example, study leave, or a leave that is not detailed in the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, like leave that needs to be granted for injuries in the workplace. All of those different types of leave work differently. They have different conditions for their entitlements. And in today's video, I'm only going to be discussing family responsibility leave. I have previously made a video around sick leave, and I've linked that down below in the description box if you want more information on how sick leave works. You can also let me know in the comments down below if you want me to make a video on any of the other types of leave and how they work. Family responsibility leave is sometimes referred to as compassionate leave, but I would recommend referring to it as family responsibility leave, and in any contracts of employment, stating it as family responsibility leave. I think that calling it compassionate leave can create some confusion around what the entitlement is, and if somebody wanted to look it up in the legislation, they would have a hard time because compassionate leave doesn't feature in the legislation. I'm including that in this video so that anybody looking up compassionate leave when they are looking for information around family responsibility leave will hopefully come across this video, just to know that there is nothing around compassionate leave in any of the labor legislation, unless of course it's contained in a specific sectoral determination or in a collective agreement for a bargaining council. In this video, I'm going to be discussing what an employee is legally entitled to. That means that I'm discussing the minimum entitlement, as in what an employer has to grant to an employee. But of course, an employer can grant more than what I'm discussing. They can give better terms and conditions than what I'm discussing in this video. This video simply states the bare minimum as prescribed by the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. If you would like to look up family responsibility leave for yourself, it's in the Basic Conditions of Employment Act under Chapter 3. Chapter 3 is specifically dedicated to leave, and it is under Section 27. Chapter 3 in the Basic Conditions of Employment Act specifically details the various types of leave. So there's one important thing we need to discuss about Chapter 3, and then I'm going to be discussing the specifics of family responsibility leave. Chapter 3 in the Basic Conditions of Employment Act is not applicable to employees who work less than 24 hours in a month. That means the types of leave detailed in the Basic Conditions of Employment Act under Chapter 3 are not applicable to employees who work less than 24 hours in a month. Please note, I am saying 24 hours in a month and not in a week. So that's the first condition for family responsibility leave, is that an employee needs to work more than 24 hours in a month to be entitled to family responsibility leave. Up and above that, there are two specific conditions for family responsibility leave to determine whether or not an employee is entitled to family responsibility leave. The first one is that an employee needs to be employed for longer than 4 months with a particular employer to be entitled to family responsibility leave. Please note that the Act specifically says longer than 4 months, so that means 4 months, and then on that first day after the 4 months have been completed, an employee becomes entitled to family responsibility leave, obviously on condition that they meet the other requirements for family responsibility leave. If a person has not been employed for a full 4 months with a particular employer, then generally speaking, their family responsibility leave will be unpaid, or they will use a different type of leave. And a reminder that an employee's employment with an employer starts on the first day that they do work, and they're going to be paid for that work. That includes any probationary period. So that first day they started working for the employer and they're going to be paid for that, that is when the cycle starts. And 4 months thereafter, they become entitled to family responsibility leave. The second condition is that family responsibility leave is only applicable to employees who work at least 4 days a week for the particular employer. So the person needs to work longer than 4 months and they need to work at least 4 days in a week. An example of 4 days a week can be working from Monday to Thursday, inclusive of Thursday. They do not need to be consecutive days. They can be any 4 days in a 7-day period. A week is defined specifically as a 7-day period in the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, and not necessarily running from Monday to Sunday. Now that we've covered who is entitled to family responsibility leave, I'm going to get into how exactly it works and what the entitlement is. Family responsibility leave works on the same cycle as annual leave. So for example, sick leave has a different type of cycle that is for a different period, whereas annual leave is a 12-month cycle and it starts from the first day an employee is employed. Remember, that includes the probationary period, and then it runs for 12 months thereafter, and then a new cycle starts. Family responsibility leave runs on this cycle. It starts at the first day they start working for an employer and they're going to be paid for that day. And then it runs for a 12-month period, and their entitlement in that specific 12 months then restarts in the next 12 months when a new cycle starts. In that 12-month cycle, an employee is entitled to 3 paid days family responsibility leave. A quick plug-in from my side: if you would like to use my leave form to assist with managing what leave is being taken and how employees apply for leave, I have linked that in the description box down below, and for a small fee, you can purchase that. The documents are drafted in accordance with the South African legislation and South African employment relations in mind. However, the prices are in dollars to facilitate the document becoming available immediately after payment. Back to family responsibility leave, and something else I want to say in here is that family responsibility leave does not accumulate. An employee is entitled to 3 days paid leave in those 12 months. That paid leave expires if it's not taken, and they get a new entitlement when they start a new cycle after those initial 12 months have been completed. This is specifically noted in subsection 6 of section 27 of the Basic Conditions of Employment to clearly state that family responsibility leave does not accumulate and it is not carried over into a new annual leave cycle. If an employee requires more than their 3 days of family responsibility leave in a 12-month period, my recommendation would not be to allow them to go into a negative, as is often done with annual leave. My recommendation would rather be to grant paid time off, or grant discretionary leave, or grant annual leave in that time if the employee wants to take their annual leave when they've exhausted all of their family responsibility leave. The reason for that is, come a new cycle, they will have a new entitlement to family responsibility leave. When is family responsibility leave taken, or when can an employee take family responsibility leave? Now, the first event that a person used to be able to take family responsibility leave for is when their child is born. This is no longer the case. When parental leave, adoption leave, and commissioning parental leave came into effect, the family responsibility leave section was altered to remove the part that states a person can take family responsibility leave when their child is born. So when an employee's child is born, if they are the birthing parent, then they will take maternity leave. And if they are not the birthing parent, they will either take parental leave, adoption leave, or commissioning parental leave. They will not take family responsibility leave. So the new first event that an employee takes family responsibility leave for is if their child is sick. In this video, I'm going to detail what conditions can be a requirement for employers to grant paid time off. But for now, I just want to discuss what the rest of the events are when someone would take family responsibility leave. The next event would be in the case of a death of a spouse or a life partner. The next event is the death of a parent, an adoptive parent, a grandparent, a child, an adopted child, or a sibling. Please note that the Act specifically discusses immediate family members and does not include extended family in the clause for family responsibility leave. Therefore, family responsibility leave does not need to be granted in the event of a death of an extended family member, for example, an uncle or an aunt or a cousin. But bear in mind that I am discussing the minimum legislative requirements in this video, so that if that event occurs, my recommendation to employees is to discuss it with employers to ask if they can take that time off. In general, I have found that employers are usually quite open with discussing and negotiating family responsibility leave, except in cases where an employee has taken leave quite often, or the company has a history where family responsibility leave or other types of leave have been regularly misused. Now I'm going to discuss the final section for this video, and that is discussing the various information around payment for family responsibility leave. So the first thing is that an employee does not need to take the whole day off. They can take part of the day off and have that be part of their entitlement. So for example, if an employee's child has to go home from school and they've already worked half of that day, but they leave halfway through their working day to go pick up their child to take them home or to take them to the hospital, then they would have only used half a day of family responsibility leave and not a full day of family responsibility leave. The second thing is that family responsibility leave is paid on an employee's usual payday, and they receive their full amount of money that they usually would receive for that day's work or for the time that they took off for family responsibility leave. Also, family responsibility leave is paid by the employer. The reason I'm saying that is because there are other types of leave in the Basic Conditions of Employment Act that are not paid by the employer, but rather they are paid through a different fund. So for example, the unemployment fund or the Commission for Occupational Injuries and Diseases. The third and final thing that I need to discuss under family responsibility leave is that an employer can require reasonable proof of the event that occurred. My very strong recommendation to employers with this one is to let employees know before the time that an employer will be requiring proof from them if they take that time off. And the reason for that is, unlike sick leave, it's not always as clear what type of proof will be accepted and what will be deemed reasonable proof. So therefore, to avoid unnecessary disputes or unnecessary issues coming about, my recommendation is that employers make it very clear what they will expect the employee to give them as reasonable proof of the event for which they are taking family responsibility leave. Examples of proof that can often be required by employers: if an employee is taking off because their child is sick, or they needed to leave the workplace to pick up their child from school because their child is sick, maybe the employer can request a letter from the school indicating that their child was exhibiting certain symptoms and needed to be picked up from school. Other proof for this can, for example, be a medical certificate. Doctors are quite familiar with the requirements for family responsibility leave, and therefore parents can tell a doctor to give them a note that indicates that they were the accompanying parent when the child needed to go to the hospital, and the doctor specifically writes a medical certificate indicating that the parent needs to take care of the child from this date to this day while they recover. Reasonable proof in the event of a death is often a death certificate or some other kind of proof that the death did occur and that the relationship of the person who died to the employee is one that is covered by family responsibility leave. It is often the case that employees will need more than 3 days off to attend a funeral, especially if they need to travel to attend the funeral. My recommendation, again, as it is with most things in the employment relationship, is to keep open lines of communication between an employee and an employer or the manager who's representing the employer to discuss the needs of the employee and the needs of the business and to try to negotiate around how can this be made possible for an employee to take the time off that they need to take off to attend the funeral. Again, I strongly recommend both from an employee side and from an employer's side to try to keep the conversation going, to negotiate around that and not have a scenario where an employee asks for more time off, an employer says no, and then they don't discuss it any further, but then they just abscond or they take extended unauthorized absenteeism to attend that funeral. Because I've done so many hearings where this is the case, that's why I'm including it in this video to say if the answer is no and an employee has the intention to simply take off that time, my recommendation is to continue to negotiate with the employer around possible suggestions as to how this can work. Possible suggestions is to take unpaid leave, to take that time off but not be paid and have it be authorized time off, or the other option is to take annual leave for that extended period that the employee needs time off. There are potentially other strategies to go about meeting the need of the employer and the employee, but my recommendation simply is to have that conversation to try and mitigate against things that can be detrimental to the employee's employment with the employer and or the operations of the employer. And that concludes the explanation of family responsibility leave. I hope that you have found this video helpful or interesting, and please remember that your engagement with my content and your subscription to my channel is how I can continue to bring free employment relations information, and therefore I would appreciate it if you like this video, comment down below, and or subscribe to my channel.